Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Marty Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you all enjoyed your weekend. I know I did. And I almost didn't want it to end, but the world must go on. We must return to our jobs and our responsibilities, and we cannot live in vacation land forever. So, aside from that, I'm also super excited to go ahead and dive into the next reading of Peerless Volume 3, also known as Wu Shuang by Meng Xi Shi, and we're starting today at Chapter 100, so I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 100. It was as if an old and dust-rimmed book had toppled from the bookshelf to lie open in front of Cui Lin. He was caught completely off guard. Those memories of You-wan were unspeakable, but more than that, they were shameful. And the shame wasn't just his own, but that of the entire Tsway family. He'd been young and reckless. He had made a mistake. It was a dark time he never wanted to remember. Thunder rolled overhead. Trembling all over, Cui Lin looked up. The sky beyond the eaves flashed bright as noon before going dark again. At some point, heavy clouds had drifted in, completely concealing the new risen moon that had been peeking brightly through the willow branches and bathing the garden in gloom. A storm was approaching. Cui Lin's mind was in chaos. First he saw Yumo's face before him, then Tsway-Pay's, smudged, jumbled, unclear. "Sanlang! Sanlang!" the maid shouted beside him. He came back to himself and stared at her dazedly. Bai Yu looked at him in fright. How had a mere change of name elicited such a reaction? The wind blew colder than before, and Cui Lin stumbled back. "My lord, your complexion is dreadful. Do you wish to call for a doctor, or should this maid summon a mistress?" These words finally penetrated his sluggish mind. "Yes, we must tell father. We must tell him at once." He shoved Bai Yu away and stumbled off, back toward the main manor. The first drops of rain had begun to patter down, but Cui Lin didn't feel the cold. His feet pounded faster and faster as he tore through the night, back soaked with sweat, his face full of naked fear. Tsway-Pay also didn't feel the cold. He was standing on a small hill outside Anping. In front of him was a lonely grave marker. They had traveled a short way east of the city to find this cemetery, where members of the Tsway family were laid to rest. Feng Xiao looked at the gravestone. Grave of Lady Yu. No foreword. No epitaph. Passers-by could only guess that the grave belonged to a woman. They wouldn't know whom she'd married or what she'd done, nor the name of the person who'd erected the marker, let alone her relationship to the Tsway family. "It must be a very long story," said Feng Xiao. He'd heard countless such tales before. Anyone who managed to make a name for themselves in the Jianghu had experienced challenges. Their pasts were often both glorious and torturous. Feng Xiao was a lone exception. He'd been a child blessed by the heavens, and his entire life had been smooth sailing. He had little interest in hearing others' stories. Listen as he might, it remained someone else's life, someone else's concern. Whether he reacted with sympathy or anger, it didn't matter, so why bother? But right now, he badly wanted to hear Lady Yu's story, because this was a story involving Tsway-Pay. Around 30 years ago, or perhaps even longer, there was a family named Yu. The patriarch was both a farmer and scholar, and he had only one child, a daughter. People called her Monyang. By the time I was old enough to remember, she had already passed away. Judging from her portraits, she must have been a beauty. The sky had grown dark. The only source of light was a lantern Feng Xiao had placed on the ground before the grave. Its gentle light haloed both men in a hazy glow, barely visible in the drizzling rain. It was as if time was slipping backward. Yu-mo hadn't merely been beautiful. She'd possessed a character people associated with sentiments like as pure-hearted as an orchid and as full of virtues as an armful of gems. Her father, Patriarch Yu, was a local scholar. Though he held no official position, he'd penned a large assortment of poems and essays. Many came to pay their respects, hoping to become his pupil. He accepted only one, a young man named Yuan Xing. He was Yumo's Shishong and her childhood sweetheart. By and by, Yumo grew into a lovely young woman, and Patriarch Yu hoped to marry her to his disciple. But Yuan Xing wished to travel and study. He left and never returned. One day, Yumo had traveled far afield to visit her extended family. On the way home, she was caught in a sudden downpour. The river swelled and the currents were swift. Yumo and her maid were separated from her family as they tried to cross the river. As they stood on the riverbanks, growing increasingly panicked, a son of the Tsway family came along. He'd come out to have some fun, but when he saw her stranded beside the river, he volunteered his help. He swam 2 round trips, carrying both Yumo and her maid to the opposite bank. The young lady was deeply grateful. She asked for his name so her father might find him and thank him later. The man introduced himself as Tsway-Pay. He claimed he was the second son of the main wife of the Leen Tsway family. He lied? Asked Feng Xiao. Tsway-Pay nodded. He lied. He was actually Cui Lin, the third son. He was a mischievous youth who often played truant and was afraid his elders would scold him when he returned home. Thus, he gave his second brother's name. In the days that followed, the Yu family sent someone to express their gratitude to the Tsway family. Tsway-Pay happened to be of marrying age, and the Tsway family had been searching for a bride. They found Lady Yu's beauty and reputation more than satisfactory and arranged the wedding. Had the river crossing incident never happened, it would have been a simple story of romance between a man and a woman of similar backgrounds. But that beautiful tale was the finishing touch, turning their union into a match made in heaven. Feng Xiao was silent a moment. So, was this a tragedy of mistaken identity, forcing 2 lovers to part? Tsway-Pay smiled. No, there was a misunderstanding, but it wasn't a tragedy. The moment Lady Yu crossed the threshold, she realized the person who'd carried her over the river was actually Tsway Sanlong, the third brother. But that hasty first meeting hadn't been a case of love at first sight. It was Lady Yu and Tsway Arlong who shared similar interests, and their relationship was a harmonious one. They both enjoyed watching the snow in winter and viewing the flowers in spring. They discussed poetry and they hiked together through the countryside. Soon enough, everyone saw them as a perfect match. The rain showed with no sign of stopping. Cui Lin didn't bother with an umbrella. He ran the entire way through the downpour, lightning forked overhead, illuminating a face that was paler than the sky itself. The guest hall of the Tsway manor was bustling with excited activity. On Tsway Yong's face was a joy that had been completely absent when he'd censured Tsway Lin and his wife earlier that day. The most promising son of the Tsway family, Tsway-Pay, the fourth son, Tsway Silong, had returned. "Ha! So you finally decided to come home. I'd begun to think you'd forgotten us." His tone was chiding, but it was obvious he wasn't the least bit upset. Tsway-Pay smiled back at him. "I was heading south to visit some old friends. When I passed near Boiling, I heard the Tsway family's literary festival was soon to begin, so I came home." Cui Yong huffed and glared at him. "So, if not for the festival, you wouldn't have come back?" "Of course I would have," Tsway-Pay laughed. "Father is here, and all his sons and daughters are present. Aren't I here now?" With his beloved son before him, Cui Yong was momentarily happy, but his smile soon faded. "After Lady Yuan passed away, you refused to remarry and insisted on traveling the world. I know you didn't truly wish to come home." "Father," Tsway-Pay began. Cui Yong waved a hand. "No need to say more. It's a good thing that you're back. You can stay for 2 or 3 months. Can't you? Looking at his father's old face, his white hair and beard, Tsway-Pay couldn't muster any words of rejection. Rapid footsteps sounded outside, and Cui Lin burst into the hall. He was a wretched sight, panting and soaked with his hair plastered to his face. Before Cui Yong could glower in anger, Cui Lin cried out, "He didn't die! He's back!" "San Lang!" Cui Yong shouted. "What madness is this? Can't you see your brother is back?" Cui Lin continued to shout as if he hadn't heard him. He's that Feng Xiao. Do you know what name he gave Bai Yu? Yu-mo, Lady Yu, don't you remember her?" Cui Yong and Tsway-Pay paled in shock. It was rare for Cui Yong to lose his composure. He braced his hands on the desk to stand, but his legs gave out under him. He slumped back down again. Could you have been wrong?" he demanded. Cui Lin shook his head desperately. "No, I asked Bai Yu several times. She said the man named Feng told her the characters. Yu as in surplus, Mo as in jasmine." After a fraught silence, Cui Yong turned to look at Tsway-Pay. "That year, you were the one who brought the news he was dead." Tsway-Pay's smile was pained. "Back then, I went to Dr. Suen, ready to implore the doctor to do everything he could to save the child. But by the time I arrived, Dr. Suen told me he was beyond saving. He'd stopped breathing. Before dying, the child had apparently begged Dr. Suen to dig him a grave. He thought that since the Tsway family had never recognized him, they wouldn't allow him to be buried in the ancestral cemetery. If he was going to be buried as an afterthought, why not just dig a grave for him right there, far from his home? That way, he wouldn't be a burden to anyone. In a moment of weakness, Dr. Suen agreed. I saw the child's grave myself. I was the one who erected the marker." "But who else would know about your Mo?" Cui Lin insisted. "She was the only child of the Yu family. Feng Xiao must be an alias." "What are you panicking for?" Cui Yong said, furious. "If that child lives, he's your own son. Are you afraid he's returned to exact revenge?" Cui Lin's face was ashen. He stood there, dumbfounded. Cui Yong drew in a deep breath. "His surname is Feng. The Yu family has no relatives with that name, and there are no Fengs in Boling. However, Lady Yu had a Shizhong. Could it be him?" He looked at Tsway-Pay as if seeking guidance. Looking back at his usually decisive father, Tsway-Pay felt for the first time that his father had aged. Sighing inwardly, he said the words Cui Yong least wanted to hear. "I haven't yet seen the young man in person. But if he really is that child, he must bear some resemblance to San Lang and Lady Yu." Cui Lin's face was drained of color. Cui Yong's lips had thinned. For a long time, he said nothing. But Tsway-Pay understood. "Then, does he resemble them? A name can be faked. It doesn't prove anything. Whoever he is, he knows about Yu-mo and deliberately revealed it to Sangha. He must know what happened. Father, please summon him back." He sighed. "If we're going to apologize and admit our wrongdoings, we need to tell him clearly." "Father!" Cui Lin's voice wavered. "I don't want to see him. I can't see him." Cui Yong's beard trembled. "So long," he said at last. "Fetch your doggo right now, and send someone to find those two. Bring them back at once." The rain fell without cease, running down the face of the crude grave marker like the tears its owner had been unable to shed in life. At some point, the lantern had gone out, extinguished in the drizzle. No moon or stars shone through the clouds, and though it was early summer, a faint chill clung to the air. They had brought no umbrellas, and Tsway-Pay didn't intend to go back for one. He let the rain soak his hair and shoulders. He'd begun the story, so he intended to finish it. A story with a sweet beginning and a bitter end. "The good times didn't last," he said. "Tsway fell ill and passed away, leaving Lady Yu widowed and childless. The Tsway family didn't ask her to remain bound to Tsway in death. and the Yu family was heartbroken for their daughter. They wished to bring her back home so she might remarry, but Lady Yu refused. She had loved Tsway deeply, and no one could replace him in her heart. She preferred to live out her days in his family home as his widow. However, back when Tsway and his wife were wed, when everyone had been exclaiming over the beautiful couple, one person had been silently stewing in envy. Feng Xiao, sharp as ever, guessed it at once. Cui Lin. Correct. Cui Lin had admired Lady Yu's beauty and talent. He was furious with himself for using his second brother's name. If he hadn't, all of Tsway's happiness, as well as the lovely Lady Yu, would have instead been his. Though Cui Lin, too, had married not long after, he and his bride's personalities clashed. He'd grown increasingly resentful, and witnessing the harmonious love between his second brother and his sister-in-law was salt in the wound. But the deed was done. No matter how it agonized him, Lady Yu could never be his. But then his second brother had passed away, leaving Lady Yu a widow. Lady Yu spent most of the year in the villa where she and her husband had often stayed, writing poetry and painting pictures in remembrance of her late husband. As time went on, Tsway-san's dissatisfaction burned a hole in his heart. Finally, he got drunk one day and slipped into the villa. Oh God, I don't like where this is going. Okay. He had his men lure away the people around Lady Yu, and he raped her. By then, he'd painted a beautiful scenario in his head. Since Lady Yu had refused to remarry and remained in the villa, Tsway-san had imagined it would be easy for him to keep her as a mistress and come and go whenever he pleased. Besides, he'd met her once. It was Tsway who'd stolen the woman who should have belonged to him. Feng Xiao raised a brow. If Tsway-san admired Lady Yu so much, why didn't he speak up when the marriage was being arranged in the first place? Because at the time, the Tsway family had found him a better match, said Tsway-Pay with a sneer on his lips. The woman in question was the second daughter of the eldest son of the Lu clan of Fahn. They were of much higher status than the Yu family. This match would be far more advantageous for Tsway-san, and thus he made his decision. It was a mistake he regretted for the rest of his life. Feng Xiao's lips curled. What a surprise. Lady Yu had a gentle nature, but that night she struggled with all her might against Tsway-san. Afterward, she resolutely refused to be his mistress and confessed the entire matter to Cui-Yong. Cui-Yong had been shocked. He summoned Tsway-san and confronted him, then beat him half to death. If not for his wife's pleas, he would have disowned him that day and expelled him from the clan. In the end, however, it was too horrific a scandal. If word of it spread, not only would the Tsway family's century-long reputation crumble, Lady Yu would also suffer censure and shame. She'd be forced to leave the Tsway family, even if it was against her wishes. And if she did, she would no longer be Tsway's widow. In order to meet Tsway in the afterlife, Lady Yu told Cui-Yong she was willing to pretend nothing had happened, so long as she never had to see Tsway-san again. Cui-Yong agreed. He moved Lady Yu to another villa and sent powerful maidservants to guard her at all times, so that she would never have to suffer such indignity again. Tsway-san was detained at the Tsway Manor. He was forbidden from taking a step outside, no different from being placed under house arrest. But sometime later, Lady Yu discovered she was pregnant. The identity of that child hardly needed to be said. "It was you?" Said Tsway-Pay. "It was me." He was calm to the point of indifference, as if it was someone else's story he was recounting. The rain had soaked his clothes, leaving him freezing cold. Even his heart was cold. Everything between heaven and earth had become smudged and indistinct. Only the soft sound of a sigh beside him was clear as a bell. But how could the carefree deputy chief Feng, the man who took nothing to heart, heave such a sigh? Tsway-Pay smiled. He must have misheard. I still have many questions. Feng Xiao was no longer fanning himself. It would have been beyond stupid to do so in the wind and rain. I know, said Tsway-Pay. The story is far from over. Chapter 101. Lady Yu had been deeply in love with Tsway-Er, yet death had separated them at a young age. She'd intended to spend the rest of her life remembering her late husband, but the horrific effects of that dark night haunted her, a nightmare that had stretched into reality and left behind a seed of evil. After realizing she was pregnant, she became restless and racked with anxiety. Sometimes she felt she'd failed her husband and wished to rid herself of the child in her womb. At other times, she felt the child growing within her was innocent. Though its father was monstrous, that wasn't the babe's fault. It was then that bad news found her again, this time from the Yu family. The Yu patriarch had fallen on the road while traveling to visit his daughter at the villa. Though the injury hadn't seemed serious, he took a sudden turn for the worse and fell gravely ill. When she heard, Lady Yu threw caution to the wind and hastened back to her parents' house. She remained at her father's sickbed, too afraid to tell him what had happened. She feared he'd seek revenge on the Tsway family and that his fury and panic would damage his already fragile health. But even with the apple of his eye keeping watch at his bedside, Lady Yu's father never recovered. He was an old man and had struck his head when he fell. He passed away not long after. Her mother withstood her grief to make the funeral arrangements, but shortly after, she too fell ill. The Yu family line had continued via single sons for a number of generations. Now, during Yumo's time, the family only had a single daughter. The rest of Yumo's relatives lived far away. Even if they wanted to help, there was little they could do. Standing up to the Tsway family was out of the question. Wary of stressing her sick mother further, Lady Yu continued to hide her pregnancy. Most women in her situation would weep and wail, or simply allow themselves to be trampled and submit to the will of her husband's family. Lady Yu was an ordinary woman. She'd never traveled the Jianghu. Yet, even after the hardships she'd endured, she remained unbending as steel. She was truly a person to be admired. Feng Xiao looked up at the sky. The rain had subsided, the drizzle fading into scattered drops. Tsway-Pay, however, was already soaked to the skin. Of course, Feng Xiao wasn't much better off. On any other day, he'd likely have frowned and gone back to the manor to wash and change. But tonight, he suppressed the impulse and remained where he was. He could hardly believe it himself. He didn't urge Tsway-Pay to return to the manor. He knew Tsway-Pay hadn't come simply to tell him a tale from the past. He was also speaking to the occupant of the grave. Besides, Feng Xiao wanted to know what happened next. Since he'd guessed wrong about the beginning, there had to be more unexpected twists. She was strong, said Tsway-Pay, but even for the strongest, things don't always go as they wish. With the death of her father, Yumo lost the family member closest to her. It was this that ultimately pushed her to keep the child. At least then there'd be someone at her side with the same blood running through their veins. But Yumo was a widow of the Tsway family. It was impossible for her to give birth to this child in secret. She therefore approached Cui Yong and explained. Cui Yong had thought putting Tsway-san under house arrest had resolved the whole sordid matter. Lady Yu's news stunned him beyond words. When he heard she wished to keep the child, he, of course, objected. If she gave birth to a babe now, everyone would know the child wasn't her late husband's. Cui Yong understood the child would still be a Tsway, but an affair between a man and his sister-in-law was an ugly scandal to be buried at all costs. Lady Yu, however, had prepared her arguments, and they were persuasive. Even if she didn't keep this child, she'd one day have to adopt a son from the clan. This was the only way she could continue Tsway-Er's legacy. In that case, she might as well give birth to the child in secret and tell everyone she'd adopted them from a distant branch of the Tsway clan. He could then be entered as Tsway's son in the records. It would be the best of both worlds. Lady Yu was determined, and her proposal was feasible. After thinking for a long time, Cui-Yong agreed. Lady Yu settled down in the new villa, and Cui-Yong dispatched trustworthy people to serve her. But no secret can be kept forever. News of Lady Yu's pregnancy quietly spread. Eventually, the gossip reached the ears of Tsway-san's wife, Lady Lu. Lady Lu came from a prestigious family as well, and couldn't possibly tolerate such an insult from her husband. She flew into a rage. If the child's origins should leak, it would bring great shame to the family. As Tsway-san's wife, she would be humiliated. She hatched a plan to secretly swap out the medicine Lady Yu was taking for a healthy pregnancy. You-wan didn't notice at first and almost suffered a miscarriage, though she fortunately realized something was wrong in time to save the child. The drug had damaged her body and the child's natural vitality. The birth was extraordinarily difficult, and she remained bedridden after. A chill wind blew, and Tsway-Pay coughed. I was sickly as a child and late to speak. My reactions were sluggish, and I enjoyed sitting by myself the entire day, ignoring everyone around me. They thought I was slow in the head or mute. Your parentage needed to be hidden, and a sickly child would have a hard time just surviving to adulthood. It was impossible for you to carry on Tsway's legacy in any meaningful sense. Tsway-Yong must have regretted his decision. Tsway-Pay smiled. Correct. He regretted it. On behalf of this child, the Tsway family had gone to great lengths to quash any rumors. They'd invented a distant branch family from whole cloth and had spent endless hours comforting Lady Lu, lest she report the affair to her family and incite conflict between their clans. All this for a child who was weak and sickly from infancy, for whom all their efforts might go to waste. But if Tsway-Pay died in childhood, everything would neatly be squared away, and the Tsway family's shame would be no more. Thus, Cui-Yong resolved to kill him. Ridding himself of a child was a simple matter. He hardly needed to lift a finger. The only obstacle was Lady Yu. Though Lady Yu was herself frail, she could sense her child's position was precarious. She kept him with her at all times and taste-tested all his food. As she watched the trusted attendants around her gradually be replaced with new faces, she realized keeping her child safe might not be within her power. She dragged her sickly body out, looking for someone who could help her. She went not to Cui-Yong, nor to the Tsway family's eldest son. Instead, she went to the fourth son, Tsway-Pay, and entrusted him with her fatherless child. She knew she hadn't much longer to live, and she begged him to take care of Tsway-Pay. Tsway-Pay couldn't bear to refuse her. He agreed to her request. Not long after, Lady Yu joined her late husband in death. Tsway-Pay was yet unmarried, and he traveled often. Afraid he wouldn't be able to protect the child when he was away, he went to Cui-Yong with the young Tsway-Pay in his arms and begged his father to spare the child's life out of respect for Lady Yu's dying wish, even if it meant sending him from boiling or concealing his name and identity. Of his 4 sons, this illegitimate youngest son was Cui-Yong's favorite. Though he thought Tsway-Pay soft, he heeded his pleading and agreed to spare the child's life, on one condition. He was to be noted down as a servant in the household and would grow up as one. No one was to reveal his true identity. Years passed, and gradually the storm of events died down. The younger generation of the Tsway family grew up, and though they knew nothing of the incident, all of them knew that the family was raising a Tsway as a servant. When the senior members of the clan occasionally mentioned it, their expressions took on a strange cast, and they picked their words with care, as if there were many things they were unable to say. Any curious child who asked questions received a scolding. Over time, they gleaned that the child in question, a boy who lacked even a name, was full of secrets, and that the senior members of the family scorned him too. Children might be ignorant, but they could be more sensitive than adults believed. These young ones picked up on the feelings of their seniors and understood they were free to bully that child to their heart's content. They gave him various nicknames for their own entertainment, like Atal or Ahua, grass, flower, or Ago or Amal, cat, dog. They threw strange insects at him, mixed incense and mud into his food, and even went so far as to punch and kick him. Despite his poor health, the child fought to survive. He was unwell almost every day, forcing his ailing body through menial tasks alongside the Tsway family servants. He knew there was no point in reporting the bullying. The only person who'd protect him was Tsway-Pay, but Tsway-Pay was often away and not always there to shield him. Yet no matter what, he refused to die. Gradually, he learned how to avoid the bullies or fight back. He still found himself targeted at least once a week. It was inevitable. Cold and fever were his constant companions. King Yama continued to kick back his soul to the land of the living, but his body grew frailer and frailer. He wasn't even permitted to attend the same classes as the rest of the Tsway family, but had to hide outside the building at the corner of the wall and listen to the few words he could catch. Ignored and unseen, he used reeds to trace out characters. His fingers silently slid along the sand, writing out the spring and autumn annals and Tswo-Juan. Whenever Tsway-Pay returned, it was a good day. Tsway-Pay would take him to Dr. Suan and recuperate and bring him to the old villa, where he'd pay respects to his deceased mother and speak of her memory. Tsway-Pay broached the idea of bringing the child with him on the road more than once, but Cui Yong never agreed. Tsway-Pay couldn't defy his father even for his nephew's sake, and besides, the boy was weak. He couldn't endure the strain of long travel. The other adult members of the Tsway family looked upon the boy with pity and contempt. Unlike the children who bullied him outright, they sighed about how brave he was to have survived to the age of 9. He lived, ate, and dressed exactly like the servants of the Tsway family. Cui Yong didn't go out of his way to torture him, but he did make a point of avoiding him. The boy could tell Cui Yong was perplexed that, despite all the hardships and illness, he'd managed to live this long. But the boy wasn't dull and foolish as they believed. He knew how to protect himself. He calculated his way through crises and threw himself into survival. He was simply too young. The house was his prison. He spun around in circles, stumbling and groping about, all to find a way to survive in this hostile place. Tsway-Pay had told him he did have a name. His grandfather had named him Tsway-Jie, steps, ostensibly out of hope that the child would be like the stone stairs beneath his small feet, rising up step by step as he found his way forward. But the child knew full well that it wasn't the real meaning behind Tsway-Jie. His grandfather had named him after the stone steps trodden on by thousands. He didn't need that name. He would rather be Amal or Ago than Tsway-Jie. At the age of 9, he fell more gravely ill than ever before. He lay alone in bed, ignored by all and growing worse by the day. Fortunately, Tsway-Pay happened to return before he succumbed completely and carried him on his back to Dr. Suan. At the time, the Zhou dynasty had been in power, and Tsway-Pay had won the emperor's favor with his outstanding scholarly talent. Tsway-Pay had to go to the capital to meet the emperor. He couldn't stay. He temporarily entrusted his nephew to Dr. Suan. The boy knew then that his opportunity had finally come. He begged Dr. Suan to let him go. He should tell everyone in the Tsway family that he died and been buried. After all, the Tsway family was hoping for his death. The moment he was gone, the enormous stone weighing on the hearts of the family would vanish, and they could breathe a great sigh of relief. Even at 9, the boy had realized that Tsway-san's wife, Lady Lu, had repeatedly sought to kill him, and that though Tsway-san knew, he chose to do nothing. The boy had avoided her attempts a few times, but he couldn't avoid them forever. Perhaps his grandfather Tsway Yong might one day show him a sliver of softness, but Lady Lu and Tsway San would never. He had to leave. Even if he perished out there in the world, at least he'd die beneath the boundless open sky. Dr. Suen had some knowledge of the boy's background and couldn't bear to reject his pleas. In the end, he agreed to keep the boy's secret and concocted some pills for his illness that he could take with him. He gave some travel money and clothes, then took him to a merchant group that was traveling south. As Tsway-Pay continued, Feng Xiao listened in silence. Tsway-Pay's telling was plain and straightforward, free of any exaggeration. Yet the history he divulged was heart-wrenching. Feng Xiao had encountered people with lives more wretched than Tsway-Pay's, but none of them had survived to adulthood. He'd also encountered people as tenacious as Tsway-Pay, but those people, including himself, hadn't experienced even a tenth as much hardship. When the heavens wish to bestow great responsibility on someone, they batter his spirit, exhaust his body, starve him, and buffet him with setbacks, all to enhance his capabilities. Anyone could recite the classics, but how many people could endure to the end? How many people would crumble from exhaustion halfway and give up? Dr. Suen pitied you. Why didn't he take you in himself? The doctor's relatives and friends all live here, said Tsway-Pay coolly. How could he fight the Tsway family for my sake? He did his best within the bounds of his fate. That was the greatest kindness he could do me, and I benefited from it. So you changed your name to Tsway-Pay to signify that you won't go back to the Tsway clan ever again? Tsway-Pay shook his head, then raised a fist to his mouth and coughed softly. Lady Yu birthed me. She wished me to carry on Tsway's legacy. I use Tsway as my surname in honor of this wish. As for Buchu, they all wanted me dead. They were waiting for me to die. A meaningful smile curved his lips. But I'm going to live. Buchu, I won't go to my death. I'm not going to die. No matter how sick I am, no matter how painful it gets, I will continue breathing. He turned back to the gravestone as Feng Xiao watched from behind. A fire seemed to ignite in Feng Xiao's heart, a heat that was nameless and indescribable. After a moment, he looked away and said, Where did you go after heading south? I found a place to settle down and live out my life. Those had been troubled times, and he'd been a lone child. No matter how mature or circumspect he was, there was a high chance he'd encounter people who meant him ill. Dr. Suen had sent him off with a reliable group of merchants to afford him some measure of safety, but once they'd reached their destination and finished their business, they'd return home. It was impossible for anyone to protect him at all times. The leader of the merchant group saw he was a bright lad and asked him to stay with the caravan as an extra set of hands. Tsway-Pay weighed his options. Being alone was dangerous, so he agreed. He followed the merchants and learned how to keep accounts, as well as how to read others' speech and mannerisms. He learned more words and interacted with more people, but the knowledge didn't make his body any stronger. As he grew in adolescence, his latent illness increasingly affected him. The merchant leader loved and cherished him greatly. He had no children of his own, and he raised Tsway-Pay as an adopted son, going so far as to find a famous physician to treat him. But such times couldn't last. The leader accidentally offended a group of thugs called the Xing gang. They killed him, and Tsway-Pay lost his pillar of support. He wandered alone for many years afterward, adrift, until he met the man who would become his father, Fahn. Tsway-Pay was a precocious child. He had an eidetic memory and could recall many events from his childhood, even if some of the details had faded. Many years later, when he took charge of the Tsway Bureau, he'd secretly sent men to investigate the merchant leader's death. That Xing gang must have met a tragic end. Tsway-Pachu's thin lips curved slightly again. The leader of the Xing gang was backed by a demonic sect from the Jianghu, the Hway sect. He was sure no one would dare confront him. I merely used a small trick to provoke Leen Academy, the largest sect in the south, and turned them against the Xing gang. They annihilated them. Whoever said those with no martial arts couldn't survive in the Jianghu? Anyone who made an enemy of Tsway-Pachu would die without knowing what hit them. So for all those years, you never intended to leave the Tsway family alone. You were just waiting for your opportunity. Cui Yong cares deeply for his reputation. Let him watch as the Tsway family crumbles away and he loses all his authority. For him, this will be a fate worse than death. As for Tsway-san, he's been confined to the Leen commandery for years. His wife despises him, and they argue incessantly. He couldn't stand the loneliness and took a mistress, but his wife found out. There's no peace in that family. He's being slowly ground down, and that's much more painful than dying from a quick stab. Before, you said Tsway Dalong, the eldest brother, was secretly aiding Leen Academy. Was that true? Asked Feng Xiao. Tsway-Pachu frowned and coughed. Of course it's true. I'd already devised another method of dealing with the Tsway family when evidence of Tsway Dalong's crimes turned up. Why waste the opportunity? There's no need for me to expend effort needlessly. Feng Xiao smiled broadly. Brilliant. I love a good revenge story. Now this is the Tsway-Pachu I know. When there's vengeance to be had, he'll show no mercy. Still coughing, Tsway-Pachu hunched over before the grave. Feng Xiao found the sight of it unbearable. All right, story's over. Lady Yu heard you as well. You've returned to avenge her. He yanked Tsway-Pachu upright. Look at you. You've got one foot in the grave yourself. I'm afraid if you stand here a moment longer, you won't make it to sunrise. And I have no plans to return to the bureau without enjoying the show. He hadn't pulled hard, but Tsway-Pachu staggered and almost fell. Feng Xiao caught him, the robe under his fingers so wet he could wring water from it. If I weren't here, could you even walk back under your own power? Feng Xiao pursed his lips, then reluctantly pulled Tsway-Pachu onto his back. If you weren't here, Qiao Xian or Zhangsun Bodi would be. There are also the Zuoye guards. Tsway-Pachu spoke between coughs, but he sounded calm enough. I imagine the Tsway family's looking everywhere for us. If we go back now, it should at least be interesting. Huh! Can 1,000 of your Qiao Xians and Zhangsuns compare to even one me? Feng Xiao sneered, complaining with every step he took. You're a bag of bones, so pointy. Consider yourself lucky my venerable self deigns to carry you while you're sopping wet like this. My robe is ruined. Since Feng Xiao was carrying him, Tsway-Pachu didn't snipe back. He'd spent too long buffeted by wind and rain and felt groggy. He pressed his forehead to the nape of Feng Xiao's neck, soaking up his body heat to warm himself, then sighed comfortably. You're the lucky one, getting to carry my venerable self. Oh, yes. I'll drop you right now. Don't believe me? If you do, you won't be able to enjoy the show. They continued in this vein until their figures faded into the distance. Only the solitary gravestone remained, with the dark lantern before it. As the rain ceased, the sky cleared, and the moon showed itself once more, painting the lantern and inscription an icy silver. Green leaves fell from the canopy, dripping frost-colored rainwater that trickled down the stone like a woman's tearful smile. Chapter 102. A single name had dragged the entire Tsway family into a maelstrom, and the most terrified among them was Tsway-san. In the intervening years, he'd realized he'd done something utterly shameful, something to be buried in the dark, something the world would condemn if it came to light. But it was human nature to shy away from one's mistakes, as if by refusing to examine them, one could also avoid the consequences. More than 20 years had passed, and the third son of the Tsway family had long pushed Lady Yu's name to the back of his mind. He'd never imagined that one day this name would drag out the past he turned away from and unearth those tragic and shameful memories. He looked to his father. After the initial shock, Cui Yong had swiftly regained his composure. Now he looked inscrutable, once again the calm and dignified patriarch of the Tsway clan. Tsway Song's anxiety eased a little. That was right. Lady Yu had been dead for many years, and there was no one left of the Yu family. Supposing that child had lived, what could he do? Lady Yu hadn't been murdered. She died of an illness. Okay. As for the child, the Tsway family hadn't killed him either. Even if he survived to grow up and hate his father's family, he couldn't touch them. The Tsway clan of Boiling was a mighty family with centuries of history who had produced countless generals and scholars of great renown. Their clan was more illustrious than many imperial families of previous dynasties. They wouldn't be toppled so easily. Tsway-Pay watched coolly as his third brother's expression went from panic to relief and easily guessed his thoughts. Sanga, if Feng Gongzi really is that child, how will you face him? Do you plan to make father clean up your messes yet again? Tsway-san was startled, then angry. I've already been punished for what happened. Even now, father keeps me confined to Boiling. Is this not enough? I've scarcely seen him since he was born, and I didn't do anything to him. What do you mean, how will I face him? He swallowed, feeling his words lacked conviction. Guilt pricked him. He was the one who ran away. If he hadn't, the Tsway family would be taking care of him to this day. If he'd been alive all these years without sending a single word, then it's clear he's a disloyal and unfilial child. He knows nothing about what's right or proper. If we choose not to pursue the matter, that's generous enough. Actually, he should be the one to apologize to us. Tsway-Pay laughed in anger. How can you even speak? If you hadn't turned a blind eye to your wife laying hands on that child while I was away, he would have stayed. He ran away because he couldn't endure any more torment. He was only 9 years old. Even if Dr. Suen helped him flee, he was left to wander the world alone. What must he have gone through? And it's all because of you. If Tsway Puchu hadn't shown up, perhaps Tsway-Pay's resentment would have remained buried. Perhaps he and Tsway-san would have remained loving siblings on the surface, as close as hands and feet. Perhaps the Tsway family would still have been a harmonious and thriving clan. Tsway-Pay in this generation and Tsway-Fei in the next, passing down the clan's glorious legacy year over year over year. Perhaps sometimes, on Tomb Sweeping Day, Tsway-Pay would recall his second sister-in-law and that pitiful child. He'd go to Lady Yu's grave and offer some incense with a guilty sigh, and that would have been the end of it. According to all the teachings, family came before the individual. Tsway-Pay's father had great authority, and Tsway-Pay also had to think about his children. He knew he was a coward, that he could never escape the golden shackles of the Tsway clan. So he hadn't confronted Tsway-san over his poor sister-in-law and her deceased child. He hadn't burned everything down, hadn't exposed all those ugly secrets for the world to see, hadn't pushed the Tsway clan down into a mire of shame. Yet now, a man named Feng Gongzi, whom he'd yet to meet, had dredged up all this rotten past, and his guilt and shame along with it. "Shut up, both of you," Cui Yong roared. "We don't even know who that Feng person is, and you've already started fighting. Don't you see how ridiculous you're being?" Cui Dalong had rushed over upon receiving the news. Hearing shouts at the door, he entered the room with cupped hands. "Father, please calm down. Let's talk. Silong has just returned from a long journey. Don't let this ruin your mood." The steward had briefed him on the way here, so his initial shock had faded. "Father, since this person knows Lady Yu's name, he must have some connection to her, even if he's not the child. The name he gave, Feng Xiao, rings a bell. Thinking on it now, I remember hearing someone mention that the current emperor established the Zhejian Bureau. and the deputy chief is surnamed Feng. Cui-Yong frowned. The Zhejian Bureau. That's right, agreed Tsway-Pay. I've heard of it too. They say the Zhejian Bureau has authority equal to the 6 ministries. They aid the emperor in obtaining foreign intelligence and spying on the Gokturks. His eyes were on his father as he spoke. He entirely missed the change in Cui Dalong's expression. Cui-Yong looked thoughtful. The emperor doesn't interfere in his subjects' private affairs, he muttered. Even if Feng Xiao is the head of the Zhejian Bureau and has some connection to Lady Yu, he can't touch us. What hasn't the Tsway clan survived? The clashes between warlords during the Han dynasty's wane, the turbulent changes of the 2 Jin dynasties, even the wars that ravaged the northern dynasties. We've never relied on the support of any one emperor. In his words was a hint of pride. Everyone else nodded, convinced. The small shred of guilt in Cui San's heart had long flown away, and as for Tsway Dalong, he'd never been troubled by guilt at all. Father, he said, if we don't mention Lady Yu directly, we can just feign ignorance. There's no reason we should bring it up ourselves. Cui-Yong also felt he'd overreacted. Wasn't ordering a panicked search for someone over a single name essentially an admission of guilt? Tsway-Pay sighed quietly. He raised his head and looked outside the hall. At the far end of the courtyard stood an ancient tree, older than him and Tsway San combined. Yet even that tree was younger than the genealogy of the Tsway family. All aristocratic families had their pride. Cui-Yong had said it. Even the emperor himself was nothing to fear. What was a mere Feng Xiao? But if Feng Xiao really was the head of the Zhejian Bureau, if he deliberately used Lady Yu's name to draw their attention, would it really be so easy to get rid of him? Cui-Yong was fixated on the glory of the past. He refused to look ahead. Tsway-Pay had traveled far and wide, and his experience was vast. Yet in this house, his father's word was law. He could only sigh to himself. Indeed, his father had grown old. The servants soon came to report that both guests had returned. Despite the rain, they hadn't taken any umbrellas. They were drenched to the skin and planned to wash and change before coming to see their host. Cui-Yong nodded. He didn't sit idle, but ordered the kitchen to prepare a late repast. It was rare that all his sons were reunited, so they sat and drank together. By the time Feng Xiao and Cui arrived, the food was ready. When Cui stepped into the inner hall, all eyes turned to him. He ignored the stares and smiled without reservation. Your Grace has summoned us so late at night. Is there anything the matter? Tsway-Pay scrutinized him, but couldn't see the frail and reticent child he remembered in the self-possessed young man before him. Cui-Yong had by now recovered his composure. He smiled. Nothing at all. You're not locals, and the streets are treacherous from the rain. I feared you might get lost, so I sent someone to look for you. If you haven't taken your supper, I'll have someone deliver it to you later. A trace of regret surfaced on Cui-Pei's features. I must be honest. It's true I haven't been here in many years. I almost don't recognize my hometown, but the lush mountains and clear waters are unchanged. I returned not just for the literary festival, but also to pay my respects to my late mother. This proclamation was greeted by ringing silence. No one had expected Cui-Pei to be this direct. Tsway-Pay was on his feet at once, emotion clear on his face. Tsway San and Cui-Yong had realized Cui-Pei looked familiar. Of course, Tsway-Pay now saw it too. Those eyes, that chin, they were the spitting image of his sister-in-law's. Who is your mother? He asked softly, keeping a tight rein on his rampaging emotions. Haven't you already guessed? Cui-Pei smiled. This smile, Feng Xiao thought, was different from usual. Or rather, it was different from the smiles he customarily directed at Feng Xiao. Cui-Pei didn't smile often. When he did, they were sneering or sarcastic, the smirk of a fox who successfully netted his prey. His reactions were tightly controlled. He kept his glee hidden in the depths of his gaze. Sometimes, when he bested Feng Xiao in a game of wits or won the upper hand, the corner of his mouth would curl and his eyes would narrow in satisfaction, softening the coldness of his brow. But he never looked at Feng Xiao like this, an expression that had the shape of a smile, yet was not. Bloodlust lurked in the corner of his lips, and it was difficult to discern whether what he felt was pleasure or something else entirely. Feng Xiao felt like the hunter who'd caught the fox by the tail. Inordinately pleased, he pulled his folding fan from his sleeve. No one noticed him fanning himself despite the cold and rainy night. All his focus was on Tsway-Pay. "You ran from Junyang while passing through the area," said Cui Yong in a low voice. "I recognized your talent, and that you were both promising young minds, and invited you to stay. If you have any complaints about your reception, then speak. There's no need for these cryptic remarks." Tsway-Pay gave another small smile. "All these years, and your grace hasn't changed a bit. You dance around the topic, pretending you're strict but fair, when you're so obviously looking out for your own interests. Your son ruined my mother and fathered a bastard on her, then tolerated his wife's brazen attempts to murder her. Yet you swept it all under the rug to protect the reputation of the Tsway family. If I were truly dead, who would seek justice for Lady Yu?" The words "seek justice" made Cui Yong's heart thump. He slammed his hands on the table and rose. "So you are Cui Jie. You were a child then. What do you know of what happened? The Tsway family raised you, yet you ran off in the night and never sent word all these years. Now you've returned to curse your own kin and elders, repaying our kindness with malice." "That's right, Jie," said Cui Dalong. "In the years you were gone, we missed you terribly. After Dr. Suen said you died, father was so heartbroken he wept. Now that we see you alive, of course we're over the moon with happiness. What happened with your mother back then was complicated. Why don't you take a seat? Let's discuss this properly and not make fools of ourselves in front of outsiders." Feng Xiao had to smother his laughter. This mixture of kindliness and threat might have worked on an ordinary man. If Lady Yu's son were less outstanding, it would have been impossible for him to confront the entire family on his own. Perhaps he'd be dissatisfied with their response, but ultimately he'd be forced to admit defeat. But Tsway-Pay was no ordinary man. He whipped up storms wherever he went, throwing the 13 floors of Yuan into chaos after dealing them setback after setback. Even the pampered and arrogant Prince of Jin sought to win him over. To Tsway-Pay, Cui Yong's words were no more than laughable posturing. Feng Xiao would have bet paid Jingja's head that right now Tsway-Pay was a cat toying with a mouse, in no rush to start his offense. He was simply watching the scene play out, waiting for them to grow more desperate and panicked. Sure enough, Tsway-Pay smiled again. "Though it's true I was young and spoke little, there is much I remember quite clearly. For example, how Lady Lu ordered the Tsway family servants to poison my food. Unfortunately, I was tough to kill and alert to their schemes. For 3 days I refused to eat until the county magistrate came to visit your grace, and I fainted from hunger in front of him, obligating your grace to look into the matter. Looking back, it's true that despite my origins, the Tsway family didn't kill me. What an enormous favor!" The faces of his audience first went red and then white. Even Cui Yong, ever shrewd and ruthless, found it hard to maintain his stoic mien. Tsway-Pay's existence had long been a thorn in his side. Every day the child had remained alive was a headache. Yet Cui Yong hadn't wanted to bear the crime of murdering his own grandson. He'd left Tsway-Pay to fend for himself within the Tsway family's manor. Of course he'd known of the suffering his grandson was put through, but he had turned a blind eye, only intervening when it was thrust in front of him. Otherwise, he ignored it. Yet the boy, who should have rightly died in infancy, had exceeded everyone's expectations. He hadn't perished out in the world. Instead, after many years, he'd returned to confront Cui Yong face to face. Only Tsway-Pay stepped forward in excitement, reaching out to grab Tsway-Buchu's shoulder. He was stopped by an extended fan. "Adye," he said around it. "It's really you. All these years, I've regretted not honoring your mother's last wishes. It was my neglect that forced you to wander the world outside, suffering untold hardships. How fortunate the heavens watched over you and kept you safe. Come back to us now and be my son. Your father uncle will treat you as his own. I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Cui Yong frowned, but held his tongue. "My name isn't Tsway-Jie," said Tsway-Buchu. "It's Tsway-Buchu." Tsway-Pay was taken aback. Which Buchu?" he asked. It was Feng Xiao who answered coolly. "Buchu meaning won't go, as in I won't go to my death. A strikingly unique name. When others hear it, they'll surely wish to know its origins. Perhaps the entire world will then know of the filth within the Tsway family." Tsway-Pay paled and smiled bitterly. "Ah, this is my fault. It's all my fault." "Adye," Tsway Dalong said, voice low. "We know you resent us, but what's past is past. Your mother is gone. Let go of these old grievances. Now you've returned, why not stay?" Feng Xiao smiled. "So you can poison him a few more times? Or are you no longer ashamed of him? Will he be entered in the genealogy now? Will you proudly introduce him as a member of the Tsway family and bury him in the family cemetery after his death?" At that, Tsway Dalong ground to a halt. He choked on his words and stared at Feng Xiao, unable to speak. Cui Yong's eyes had never left Tsway-Buchu. Slowly, he said, "If you are willing to return, Sulong may adopt you. You become a legitimate family of the Tsway family. No one will dare speak out against you." Not only did Feng Xiao want to laugh at that, Tsway-Buchu did too. When they exchanged a glance, Tsway-Buchu could see pity in Feng Xiao's eyes. Not for Tsway-Buchu, but for Cui Yong. Pity for Cui Yong because he was old. Pity because he'd sat comfortably in the seat of clan leader for so long that his eyes had grown blind. If Tsway-Buchu wished for the Tsway family's acknowledgement, why had he waited so many years to return? Yet Cui Yong had spoken like he was granting an incredible favor, as if Tsway-Buchu would weep with gratitude at his selfless generosity. Tsway-Buchu saw Feng Xiao mouth the words, "Taoist Master Tsway, it's fortunate you take after your mother." He coughed and ignored him, turning back to the expectant Tsway family. "I told you I returned to pay my respects to my late mother and attend the literary festival. As for the Tsway family..." His gaze swept over Tsway Dalong and Tsway San without pausing before finally landing on Cui Yong. "I've never been part of it. Since I wasn't then, I won't be now either. Perhaps you believe the Tsway family loftier than the sky itself, but my surname is Tsway for only one reason: to fulfill my mother's wish. I have no connection to the Tsway clan of Boling." His mouth twisted sharply, then quickly smoothed again. Every word he uttered was clear and deliberate, flying directly to the Tsway family's ears. "This surname and this clan are of no importance to me. Forget accepting me into the genealogy. If you tried to gift me the entire Tsway family, I'd have no interest. If your grace has nothing else to say, we'll retire to our rooms and rest, lest we oversleep and miss the festival. Apologies for the inconvenience." Tsway-Buchu had thrown a thunderbolt into the pond that was the Tsway family, sending the panicked shadows of shrimp and fish darting about in the water. With this, he took his leave, sleeves fluttering elegantly in the wind. Well, we just got into some nitty-gritty stuff, you guys. I don't even know where to begin with this because what? Oh man, I am so glad that we've gotten some depth and background into Tsway-Buchu and even more understanding and like his character and why he is the way that he is. And I have to say, whew, that was deep. So let's just go ahead and dig into it. First off, as soon as I smelled, the hint of Tsway family drama, I was like, ooh, let's see what it is. Haha. I was not happy with where it went. Not happy to know that Cui Lin raped that poor young woman. And it's just like, why did you have to get drunk and do that? I get she probably would have said no to you, but all you had to do was approach her and express how you feel and see if maybe there was a chance for something. But for you to just drink, get drunk, and then go rape her, that speaks very poorly on your character. It was also, that was very sad. It was very disturbing. One thing I will say is that I was at least glad that he was beat within an inch of his life by his father. And that the father at least, set her up to live a lifestyle, the lifestyle she wanted to live. He made sure that there were people around her to protect her and that she wouldn't have to see the sun again, because she agreed. She was like, we don't need to put this out there to everyone. And, the consideration wasn't just for the Tsway family, but also, her reputation, because, since it was mentioned, if the word got out, it would ruin her reputation as well, which, was discussed before when it came to all those women that were saved from Meng Xi Shi's little cave secret thingy. So her identity, her issue of being raped was being protected. So I did like that. But boy, as soon as I gave him flowers, they pretty much went down the drain. But let me still go in the order of my list. Also, Lady Lu, why are we poisoning this woman? You just because you mad? And I think the thing that really pisses me off about Lady Lu is that there was absolutely no concern. None whatsoever. Like, wow, you were raped by my husband? Are you okay? How are you? That must have been a devastating experience. It was just like, how dare my husband rape another woman and then have the audacity to get her pregnant? I'm going to try to kill this woman and the baby inside of her. Like, I'm sorry. That's just not the first reaction I'm going to have if I had found that out from my husband. If anything, first off, I'm going to beat my husband's ass because who the hell are you to be raping someone? Like, that's just absolutely not tolerable at all. And so, yeah, like I said, just as fast as I was about to give Grandpa or Cui Yong his props, they went down because then he was going to try to kill Tsway-Pay, and if it had Tsway-Pay not been there, Tsway-Pay probably would not exist. So, it was just really sad to hear about the hardships that he suffered, and I definitely agree with Tsway-Pay. It's like, first off, what you mean y'all didn't do anything to him and, he ran away and it's his fault, blah, blah, blah. It's like, y'all do realize, number one, you made him live as a servant and you allowed for him to be bullied. You allowed for him to be, poisoned or the attempts at the poison. And for y'all to say that y'all didn't kill his mother, yeah, you did. Because you let Lady Lu do what she did. And that weakened his mother's constitution. And eventually she passed away, which I have to say, her story is just so sad. Because she got saved, in the rain or whatever. And ended up, being wedded to the wrong person, but the right person. And they were actually in love and had a great life, but he died, and then she got raped and had the freaking child of this man, which I know the complexities of, women being pregnant with the child of their rapist. But then not only that, her father was ill and then he passed away and then her mother was ill. It's like, dang. All of her she just gets no wins. And that was so sad to me. And then all of that no wins was just passed down to Tsway-Pay, I'm glad Dr. Suan agreed to go with his plan to let him, go off and pretend to be dead. I also wonder if Dr. Suan recognized him when he first saw him when they came. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. I'm glad now I know that Tsway-Pay actually told him his name. Because now that dream all the way from volume 1 makes perfect sense. Because I was like, it can't be a memory because he wouldn't remember something like that because he was literally a baby. But knowing he was told that piece of information, then of course he could have dreams about it. So, speaking of names... Oh my God. On page 217, just explaining why he chose to name himself Buchu. Ugh, that was powerful stuff. I absolutely love that. And I know that Feng Xiao loved it too, because at first he was like, Buchu, as in, I'm not going back to the Tsway family. He was like, no, Buchu, as in, I'm not going to my grave. I shall live and not die. Like, I was like, okay, I support you, sir. Yes, you shall live. You shall not die. You will overcome this sickness that you have, or you will learn to live with it and still be the badass that you are. Yes, sir. So, there's that. And then the other thing I wanted to address was actually Tsway-Pay's guilt for not having done more for Tsway-Pay. And I have to say, when it comes to all the members of the Tsway family, I actually don't feel any type of like anger or malice or anything for Tsway-Pay, because he really did do the best that he could. And I understand he is going to have that guilt anyway. But I do understand, which was mentioned in the book, that in that culture, in Chinese culture, and in a lot of Asian culture, they are a collectivist society, whereas it's family first, the people above individual. They're not in the United States where we believe in individualism like crazy. And so it's completely understandable that he acted as he did, responded as he did, and just submitted to whatever his father said and did the little bit that he could for Tsway-Pay. So I understand the guilt that he has, and that's probably something that, he'll have to work through on his own. But speaking for myself, I understand. And he did the best that he could with what he knows and what they were working with in society. It's just unfortunate. Sometimes people's best isn't good enough, and that's the thing that people have to get comfortable with, because in families, especially when we talk about parents and maybe grandparents, if you're raised by your grandparents, people are always like, oh, they did the best that they could, blah, 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 as like justification. Sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent. But as justification for them raising you a certain way, allowing certain things to happen, or, things like that. And it's like, okay, but their best was not good enough. I deserved better than their best. And that's what I say all the time, when it comes to certain things, like with me and, my mother, I'm like, I deserve better than her best. Okay. It wasn't good enough. So, from that perspective, I do understand the guilt, and I could in some ways be like, yeah, you should have done better, but I also understand why he didn't do better. Two truths can exist at the same time. It's the fact that he even has remorse and guilt, and that he did do what he could for Tsway-Pay compared to the rest of the family members, why I have so much more mercy for him. So I'm excited to see where this goes in the next few chapters. I cannot wait to see. I also just want to go ahead and mention to you all, because you guys do request things sometimes in the comments. I rarely see it, but when I do, it makes me really happy. I had someone that asked from now on, which there weren't any this time around, if I could read the footnotes in the moment of reading instead of like referring back to them in the end, because it kind of pulls readers out of the moment if they are not understanding the reference. So just so you guys know, from now on, when we do come across footnotes, I'm going to finish out that sentence, or maybe even finish out the paragraph, depending, on where it's placed, and read the footnote, and then we'll go dive back into the story, because I don't want people to not understand. That makes perfect sense. And then for the individual that actually asked me to put the names in my description, I'm also doing this for you too. I just started it in the previous video, but I have the names that are mentioned within the chapters that I read for the day, and the pronunciation as best as I can try to give. And I will also just maybe sometimes, maybe not all the time, if the names are mentioned over and over again, I think you could just hear it and get it. But I'll try to go over the names, and you can just say them with me. So at this point, If you don't need the pronunciations, you can just click off this video now because we're good to go. And I'll see you next time, and you can just give it a little like, please. But for those individuals who need to hear the names again, for the names that were mentioned in the following chapters of chapter 100 through 102, we have, of course, Tsway-Pay, Tsway-Pay, Feng Xiao, Feng Xiao, Cui Hui, Cui Hui, Cui Lin, Tsway-Pay, Cui Yong, not repeating those, Yuan Xing, Yuan Xing. So it's going to be more like a SH, not sing, but Xing, kind of, sort of. Just watch my pronunciation video to help you with X sounds. Anyway, you more. So you keep your lips like that and try to make an E sound. You more. And then Bai Yu. And last, Fahn Yuan. Not Fahn Yun, not Fahn Yuan, but Yuan. Like you in? You going? You in? Fahn Yuan. Okay. So again, I may not go over the names verbally with you every time, but they will be in the description now, so there are no questions. Again, when you guys have questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the comment section. And don't forget, we are doing a Q&A soon, probably sometime in the month of June. So go ahead and ask whatever you want to ask me, and I'll just keep adding your questions to the list. I hope you all have a beautiful day, a beautiful morning, a beautiful night, whatever time you are watching my video, and Hway.